Wow. Hello. Good evening. Wonderful, wonderful. I have to I have to keep it this way because Alec is very tall, and that does not mean I'm not tall too, but in proportion. Welcome to Mid Local. This is our first event of this season. We have a really weird season. Our season started in June, but I could not hope for a better person to open our season with than Alec Karakatsanis. Uh, I've been following Alec for maybe the past 7 years, and I only learned that he was from Pittsburgh a couple of months ago. And so, really, this is exactly what Made Local really was built for, to introduce and reintroduce you all to the amazing writers that Pittsburgh offers. My name is Soni Toneme, and I serve as the executive director of your Pittsburgh Arts and Lectures. On behalf of our amazing board and volunteers, staff, welcome. If this is your first time joining us, we are happy that you're here. A bit about us. Pittsburgh Arts and Lectures is a nonprofit and independent literary presenting organization in our 35th year. We partner with the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh to present some amazing events in 4 different series. Made Local, which is this one, where we present authors who are local to Pittsburgh or with books that are about Pittsburgh. New and Noted, which are for noted writers who have new books out, who are touring. And Poets Aloud for the poets, nationally known poets. Words and Pictures, my favorite series for children literature authors. We just announced our season for that. And in partnership with the CLP and the Carnegie Museum, we present our flagship series, 10 Evenings, that are held at the Carnegie Music Hall. It's in the same building, but on the other side. You can learn more about us on our website at pittsburghlectures.org, lectures with an S. We host around 1 event per week, so we have 3 more events in this month coming up. Next week on June 11th, here we are hosting another mid-local event with the celebrated and to celebrate Pride Month as well with the novelist and memoirist Michael Lowenthal with his new memoir, Place in V. The following week on June 18th, we will host Lisa Olzak Zomstein with her new book, The Brady's Band Flood of 1980. Tragedy in Western Pennsylvania. Some of you might have learned about this flood that happened in 1980. Both events are free. They're here. We encourage you to register on our website. We will end the month with a new and noted lecture on June 24th, here again in this hall, by welcoming the author of Dirtbag, Massachusetts. I cannot pronounce this state, so I will always say like the state where Boston is. So Isaac Fitzgerald is going to join us with his new memoir, Travelogue, American Rambler. Ticket for this event comes with a free signed copy of the book. So all of our new and noted, the way the authors are touring, they are selling their books. So we charge you the price of the book and you get a signed copy of the book. As some of you might have noticed, this morning we just announced another new and noted event with the one and only R.F. Kuang with her new book, Taipei Story, coming in September. You can visit our website for more information. Our friends from White Whale Bookstore are here with signed copies of Alec's books. They're here. If you did not get your copy, we ask that you get your copy at the end of the program because Alec is happy to personalize your books for you after the lecture. Tonight's program will be a lecture by Alec, followed by a conversation with Professor Ralph Banks, And in between, we will have time for questions from you as well. For the Q&A, we ask that you raise your hand, and Professor Banks will call on you. There will be two amazing staff who will pass microphones around for you to ask the questions. Because we only have 30 minutes for the Q&A, we ask that you keep your questions short and concise, and so start thinking about them right now. And we also ask that you silence your phones and not taking flash photography during the event. You can always take pictures, but do not use flash. This concludes our announcements for this evening. Now, I want to introduce both Alec and Professor Ralph Banks. Dr. Ralph Banks has been employed at the University of Pittsburgh for more than 40 years. In the past, he was researcher associate at the University Center for Social and Urban Research, associate director of the Center on Race and Social Problems, and study abroad faculty leader at the University Center for International Studies. Since 2020, he has been an instructor in the Pitt Osher program, which offers non-credit courses for people over age 50. His most recent book is Race and Social Problems, Restructuring Inequality, from Springer Press with Dean Larry Davis. His awards include Ronald H. Brown Leadership Award by the Urban League of Pittsburgh, Best Researcher by N Pittsburgh Newspaper, and Racial Justice Award by YWCA of Pittsburgh. His doctorate is in Public Policy Research and Analysis from the University of Pittsburgh. Now, Alec Karakatsanis, that's with a Haitian accent. He's probably going to correct me later, is a native Pittsburgh and the founder and executive director of Civil Rights Corps. He has pioneered constitutional civil rights cases to challenge the size, power, profit, and everyday brutality of the punishment bureaucracy across the United States. He is a graduate from Yale College with a degree in ethics, politics, and economics, and Harvard Law School, where he was the Supreme Court chair of the Harvard Law Review. Alec was a public defender representing impoverished people accused of crime in Alabama and Washington, D.C. Among his awards, Alec was named the 2016 Trial Lawyer of the Year by Public Justice and received the prestigious 2023 New Frontier Award from the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library. He is the author of 2 books and also writes Alec's Copaganda newsletter. Alex likes playing the piano and soccer, collecting rocks, singing, growing flowers, creating mosaic from dry flowers, repeating the same jokes until it becomes funny. We share that in common. Writing poetry, we do share that in common as well. And making weird paintings and large pieces of wood and metal. I don't do that. You can watch Alex talk about Copaganda and the media and on the Daily Show with Trevor Noah and the Breakfast Club. You can also watch Alex discuss the groundbreaking Right to Hug campaign and how civil rights lawyering can challenge authoritarianism. But today, we have the absolute privilege to have him here in Pittsburgh to discuss his book, Copaganda. Please help me give a warm Pittsburgh welcome to Alec Karakatsanis.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I love that.
Yes.
I have to adjust this because Sony is so short. It's so great to be here, see so many friendly faces, people I haven't seen in so long. I think the format is I'm going to talk at you for a few minutes, say a few things that I hope will be interesting and useful to you. And then Ralph is going to come, Dr. Bangs is going to come out and we'll have a little chat here, the two of us. He said he has some very difficult questions for me. We'll see if he stumps me. And then we'll open it up for audience questions. Sony said we have 20 minutes for that, but we'll go until someone asks a question that isn't very good. And then if someone asks a question that's not very good, we'll just end it right there. So I think the format for me that I prefer is I'll just talk, but if someone feels really urgently about something I'm saying, you can feel free to interrupt me and shout something, and maybe like sometimes that ends up being, someone's really disagreeing with something I'm saying, like we can really hash it out like right there. But the format I really prefer is that I'll talk a little bit about my background and my career, and kind of so you have some understanding of how I came to think the things that I think and to write things that I'm writing. So you understand as well some of the biases that I'm bringing to this, right? Because I don't expect you to agree with everything that I've concluded. And once you have some conception of the trajectory of my life experiences and my career and the things that I'm working on, I'll talk a little bit about the Copaganda book and why I wrote it, and maybe I'll pick out a few of the concepts and ideas in the book. I don't want to spoil it because I know all of you are going to get it, and then hopefully we'll be done. And before we begin, one other kind of housekeeping matter that I just wanted to note is all of the royalties from the book are donated to an amazing charity called the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, which works with unhoused people in the Skid Row neighborhood of Los Angeles to fight against police repression. So you won't be supporting me if you buy a copy of the book. You'll be supporting the White Whale and the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. Also, I brought with me a few extra copies of the book. So if there's anyone here who can't afford the book but wants to have it, just let me know when you come up afterward and I'll give you a free copy. And then finally, we have a fund set up that always provides unlimited copies of all of my books, or both of my books. And I actually have a third book that just came out in France, but it's in French and we don't have it here. But both these books are always free for any students who can't afford them, and for anybody in jail or prison. So if you work for a program that sends books inside to prisons, come let me know afterward. I can take your information and we can get you as many books as you want. Let's fill the Pennsylvania prisons with this book.
We have a lot.
Great. Or if you're a teacher, if you know teachers and you want your students to read it, we have a free paperback version of the book that we just give to teachers, no questions asked. So just come find me afterward if you're interested in that too. Okay, so I started my career as a public defender, first, as Sony mentioned, in Alabama, and then in Washington, D.C. And in 2014, I was fortunate enough to get a grant from Harvard Law School to quit my job and to become, I guess, a civil rights lawyer. And I remember, I'm as you can tell, they asked me if I had any slides for tonight. This is a little awkward speaking in front of a photograph of myself. I don't ever really use slides. I don't use, AI or things like that. I'm kind of a proud Luddite. And although this is an AI generated image. But so I remember walking into the Harvard Law School office, and I was applying for this grant, and I didn't want to bring. Everyone else had PowerPoints, and I brought like a bunch of large poster boards, and the poster boards said really ludicrous things on them. They were like, dismantle the entire criminal legal system and abolish the police and things like that. And Harvard had announced this big grant for alums to start nonprofits, and it turned out that nobody else even remotely qualified applied. So even though I had these ridiculous ambitions, they had to give it to me. And there was a huge section of the faculty that was lobbying to just get rid of the program altogether instead of giving it to me. But they did give it to me. And the first thing I did with Harvard's money was I flew back to where I'd started my career in Montgomery, Alabama. I was driving around Alabama, and I was going from courtroom to courtroom and jail to jail and interviewing people and their families and documenting what I was seeing. And really the trip changed the course of my life and career. And on the last leg of my trip, I came back to Montgomery, and before going to visit some of my old colleagues, because when I was in Montgomery, I'd handled very serious federal felony cases. I had actually never been to the local municipal court in Montgomery, which is actually most people's interaction with the punishment bureaucracy. But it handles so many more cases than the courts that handle really serious cases. So I walked into the local municipal court that day in Montgomery, and there were 67 people in jail garb and chains, shackled together. All of them were Black. And as I watched the proceedings, it became clear to me that not a single one of them was charged with a crime. They were all there that day in jail because they owed debt to the city of Montgomery that they couldn't afford to pay. So they've been jailed for owing that debt from old tickets that they had accumulated. And as I was actually forcibly removed from the courtroom for reasons that we won't get into here. Well, for those of you that are lawyers, maybe you're taught in law school. In Alabama, they have a rule where if you're not a member of the bar of that state, you can't just stand up from the audience and shout objections. So I learned that day that you can't do that there. Maybe you can do that here. I don't know. So. But I had taken the notes that I was keeping, and I went next door, which in Montgomery, like in so many other communities around this country, the jail is both physically and metaphorically connected to the courthouse. And I went into the jail and I started calling out the names of the people that I had met. And the first woman I met is really, I think, one of the two stories I want to tell you tonight before I start talking about the book, because it really shaped the way that I think about not only the punishment bureaucracy, but about propaganda and about the stories that our society tells itself of what the system is doing and why. And I met Charnel Mitchell, and Charnel had told me that she had been sitting on her couch with her 1-year-old on her lap and her 4-year-old next to her when the police raided her home on a Sunday night and just took her away from her babies. And she had no idea where they were. Charnel owed some traffic tickets from 2010 that she hadn't been able to pay. And like in so many other places prior to our lawsuits around the country, Montgomery had privatized the collection of its traffic debt to a company that called itself a probation company. But really, it was just a debt collector that used the power of the jail and police and court system to threaten people with violence and kidnapping if they didn't pay the money that was owed. And they would then add their own fees onto the debt. And so someone like Charnel had like maybe let's say $100 ticket. If you can pay it right away, you just go. You get maybe some points on your license, and you go with your life. But if you can't afford to pay the $100, you're put on a probation with this company, and then you have another $35 a month, $45 a month. It depends, added on, and they take that first. So if you can only make a $20 payment every month, your debt just grows, right? And then they charge you $20 every time they randomly drug test you, because you have to be drug tested if you're on this debt collection plan, right? Which you then pay for. So someone like Charnel could be jailed 5, 6, 7, 8 times for years and have paid $500 or $600, $700 on a $100 ticket and still owe more than when she started. So she showed me her court document, and on the back of on the front of her court document, it said, pay us $2,807 or do 59 days in jail. And she explained to me that in Montgomery, you get credit to sit out your debt at $50 a day. So she owed $2,900 or $2,800, so she had 59 days. Now, on the back of her court document, one of the guards had given her a pencil in what passes for an act of kindness in this system, and she had been writing desperately the days 1 through 59, trying to figure out when she could get back to her children. And some days, instead of writing $50, she was writing $75. So I asked her, why are you writing $75? Well, she said, every day all the women compete to see who can be selected to be a janitor. Because if you clean the feces and the blood and the mucus and the mold from the floors and the walls, because all the women sleep on top of each other in these cells that have one toilet, or you clean the judge's bathroom, then you get an extra $25 a day toward your debt. So by the time she had been, finished explaining this to me and telling me she didn't know where her kids were, like she had been crying and like all of her pencil calculations were smudged. And I had really no idea what I was doing. I took photographs of her document. I was actually kicked out of the jail as well once they figured out what I was doing. And the 5 people I met before they kicked me out of the jail became my first clients as a civil rights lawyer. And a few weeks later, I really had no idea what I was doing. I just wrote up a legal case, and I filed it in the federal court in Montgomery. And within a few weeks, we're in a federal courtroom, and the federal judge is so outraged at what has been happening that the federal judge orders all of the city officials to appear in person to explain how could this be going on. And this is really I'm finally getting around to the point of the story. The instead of just coming and explaining why they were doing what they were doing, the city just released everybody from its jail. And that was a really powerful moment for me, because what the city was essentially saying is, we do not have the ability to explain using evidence and reasons and words in a courtroom how what we're doing makes any sense at all and is consistent with the Constitution. We, without any care in the world, despite all the stories that we tell the public about how and why these systems are justified, we can, without a care in the world, without a care to public safety, right, we can just release everybody from the jail on a single day. And it really, I think, undermines some of the basic narratives that we're told about why these institutions are necessary and what they're doing and how they're doing it and what purposes they're serving. So after that happened, we started working on these issues all over the country. Right as I was negotiating the settlement in that case, Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri. And I went to Ferguson, and I started going out every night and going in the streets and in people's homes, home after home after home. We'd have these amazing meetings, people's living rooms, and everyone would bring their cousins and their siblings and their friends, and everyone would go around and tell their story. And it turned out in Ferguson, Missouri, at the time Michael Brown was killed, the city averaged 3.6 arrest warrants for every household. So 2.2 arrest warrants for every adult. Almost every single one of those warrants was for unpaid debt to the city of Ferguson. The city of Ferguson had completely converted its local municipal court system into a profit-generating system. And we settled that case maybe finally a couple of years ago, after many, many years of fighting against Ferguson. And for just like in Montgomery, we sort of eliminated all of these practices and got compensation for people that had gone through it. But in all of my years in Ferguson, I never saw a white person jailed. Now, that's not to say it never happened. I just never saw it in my 9 years of representing tens of thousands of people in Ferguson. So when we started winning these cases all over the country, it occurred to me that really the same core flaw, this constitutional flaw, that no human being should be kept in a cage because they can't make a monetary payment, should be separated from their children because they lack access to cash. That same flaw is the core of what we call the American money bail system. The money bail system is what happens to people in most places around the United States. Right after they're arrested, they're brought to court. Like here in Pittsburgh, you could go down and watch this happen, and you're told you're free to go home. You're free to go to your job, your house of worship, your pet, your loved ones, your children, your medical care. You're free to go, but you have to pay us first. And if you can't pay us, you're just stuck in jail. Okay, so this system is really the core. This system in the United States has been privatized for profit with the multi-billion-dollar commercial money bail industry, which means a series of companies is actually deciding who to sponsor to bond out. And I don't know if there's any bail bond agents in here, but in the early years of me doing this work, they would come to all of my events and they would just sit there always silently, kind of just staring at me. I don't know if is anyone with the bail bond industry? Okay, no, I'm less popular with them these days. So the bail bond industry exists only in the United States and the Philippines. And at the time we started doing this work, there were about 500,000 human beings on any given night in the United States who were in a jail cell just because they couldn't pay money to get out of jail prior to trial. So for those of you who understand even really basic things about the US legal system, we are supposed to have something called the presumption of innocence, which means that you're not supposed to be punished until after you have a trial by a jury of your peers. That essentially for much of the last several decades has not really existed if you and your family don't have money in many places around the United States. So we realized that this same flaw that we've been litigating for people who owed debt from old traffic cases and ticket cases and low-level criminal prosecutions actually applied to the money bail system. And it was even worse in the money bail context because people were supposed to be presumed innocent. People were being jailed prior to even having the opportunity to fight their case in court. So we started in 2015, started filing these cases, filed the first challenge under equal protection and due process clauses since the rise of mass incarceration on behalf of a woman named Christy Dawn Varden in 2015. And shortly after we filed this case, the federal government intervened in our case and agreed with our position. And so what had been like sort of a fringe theory was now the official position of the United States government. We started winning these cases kind of all over. And I remember many years ago, my grandmother said something to me that actually helped inspire the book and some of the way we design our cases. I was explaining to her the debtor's prison cases and the bail cases. She's actually not here, but she couldn't make it tonight, but she is just a few miles away and is going to watch the recording. So hopefully this little device is working for Grandma. And I don't even know if you remember this, Grandma, but she said, well, if these people are making such an important decision, like whether someone's in a cage or separated from their family or whatever, on the basis of reasons that are so flimsy, I don't remember if that was the word she used, but the general point was if they're making this decision that's so important to someone's life, to someone's family, to their children, on the basis of something so flimsy, how can we trust anything they say? This is a really, really, really important point because one of the key foundational principles of a lot of our litigation is when you just show people what this system is doing, people lose faith in it. And so these are the same people who every night on the news are telling you who to be afraid of. They're telling you that you should be a little bit more afraid of them today than you were yesterday, right? They're telling you that the only way to feel good in this environment, the only way to address those fears that they've made you feel is more and more and more investment in surveillance and punishment and brutality, right? But these are the same people who've been doing all this other stuff. How do we trust anything they say, right? And that theme turns out to be a real thread that I connect throughout the Copaganda book. So that's sort of one story about the origin of the work that I've done on the criminalization of poverty and how I kind of started my career being interested in these issues of systemic injustice in the punishment bureaucracy. The second story I want to tell is actually the story that I begin the Copaganda book with. And the story is that I was in Flint, Michigan a couple of years ago. And I was there because we had been getting a lot of complaints from our clients in jails around the country that they were no longer able to visit with their families in the jail. And we started looking around, and in many jails across the country, covering millions of people every single year, had eliminated family visits for children and families and spouses, etc. And we started looking into why this was going on and started looking at some of the contracts, and it turned out that there is a multi-billion-dollar prison and jail telecom industry. So a lot of people know about private prisons, but what fewer people really understand is that even the public jails and prisons in our society have been essentially completely privatized for profit in terms of everything that happens in them. So the food and the medical care, the mail, the phone, right? So these companies, which are almost entirely owned by a couple of very large private equity interests, are just sort of figured out that if people are not permitted to visit with their families, they might be forced to spend more money on phone and video calls. And they also figured out that if they provided what are essentially kickbacks to sheriffs around the United States, saying, if you end these in-person visit policies, we'll give you an extra cut of the profits that we can all make, they figured out they could get a lot of jails to stop allowing visits. So I was in Flint, Michigan, because Flint had ended in-person family visits. And I was standing outside the jail, and I have some photos of this that I took that are in the Copaganda book. But the outside the I just was walking around town, and I got to the jail, just taking a look at it, and I was going to go inside the jail and just meet some people and just talk to people and see what was going on. There were chalk drawings on the sidewalk, really beautiful chalk drawings, hearts and flowers and happy birthday, mom, dad, I love you, I can't wait to see you. And it turned out that children of Flint would come to the sidewalk outside the jail and draw these drawings, and then their parents in the windows above would look down on them and wave and make little signs at them. And you could go there any day and kind of watch this beautiful interaction. And actually, on my first day in Flint, as I was standing there, a bunch of guys come out from the sheriff's office with hoses and soap and mops, and they just scrub away everything. Because even that form of communication was too much for the system to handle. Why am I telling this story now? Well, it turns out that the sheriff in Flint was a very prominent national figure who had come to prominence, at least nationally, in the 2020 protests, the uprisings after the killings of Breonna Taylor and Eric Garner and George Floyd and so many more people. And he had come to prominence as what you might call a progressive police officer, a good apple, if you will. And he was, famous in the mainstream news for suggesting that the police put down their weapons at the protests and hug everybody, right? He said the police are going to hug you guys today, right? Things like that. The police love you. These are some of his lines. And this is the same person who's talking about hugs at these protests, who is literally forbidding the families in Flint from hugging each other. I was sitting there just talking to people who said, the only thing I wish in the world is to hug my 3-year-old. Or in someone's living room, and there's a 6-year-old girl pulling her hair out because she hasn't been able to see her mom in 8 months, right? This is what this sheriff was doing. And we got all their internal emails, and they're just joking around with each other about how much money they're going to make in these emails. They have a nickname for Captain Gould at the jail, who helped negotiate the contract, Captain Gould, they're talking about all the grandmothers that have to swipe their MasterCard. I mean, this is the kind of email that they're exchanging with each other. Kamala Harris chose this sheriff to be one of the most prominent speakers at the Democratic National Convention in 2024 because of his progressive record, right? So anyway, we ended up suing them, and there's great stories to be told there, but I'm already taking too much time with this story. But the last thing I want to say is, I went to Lester Holt at NBC Nightly News, and I asked him to do a story on this. And to his credit, Lester, who at the time was the most trusted person in U.S. news, that's a very low bar, but I went to Lester because he was in surveys, the most trusted man in news. And to his credit, NBC flew to Flint, and they went inside the jail. They interviewed people. They talked to people who were going through this, and they put the sheriff on national television. And they said to the sheriff, essentially, you can go watch this on Lester Holt, but it's essentially, why are you doing this? And the sheriff said, to make money. And Lester Holt said, are you going to stop? And the sheriff said, yeah, I know it's wrong, and we'll stop. And so hundreds of other sheriffs are doing this right now. Hundreds of millions of dollars are being made. It's a direct transfer of wealth from the poorest, most vulnerable families in our society. It's the monetization of parental love. So we have a whole campaign called The Right to Hug, which is trying to establish constitutional right for children and parents to hug each other. But it's really about something deeper. It's really about the stories that our society tells itself about the purposes of these systems. Because what the sheriff was really saying on national television was, when we have a policy at the sheriff's department, there's no telling whether it's based on public safety or any legitimate rationale, right? In fact, Many of our policies are based on other things that the public wouldn't support if we verbalize them. And so Copaganda is really that gap between what these systems are actually doing, what purpose and function they play in a deeply unequal society. So what is the real purpose of the apparatus of repression in a society that is extraordinarily unequal, right? So that the real, what, let's call it the truth of, not that there's one truth, but let's call it sort of what an accurate understanding of why we have these systems and why they do what they do and why they do what they do to who they do it to and not to others, right? These are, and the gap between that and the stories that the system tells itself and tells us about why it's doing what it's doing. So I want to say a couple of things about the book, and then I'll call Dr. Bangs out and we can have more of a deeper discussion. First, let me just define for you in a little bit more detail what I mean, at least when I say the term propaganda. It's a special kind of propaganda that I think has really three main functions. The first function is it narrows our conception of fear and threat and safety. So Malcolm X said a long time ago something to the effect of, I have this quote in the book, but basically like, if you watch a lot of news, the news will have you hating the people that are being oppressed and loving the oppressor, right? And I can't really put it better than that myself, but I can attempt to add a little bit onto that. So if you watch a lot of local, regional and national news, you're made to feel very, very afraid of poor people, of people of color, of immigrants, of unhoused people, of people with mental illness, people with disabilities. You're made to feel very, very afraid of strangers. This is a really important point for the system. One of the reasons that's such an important point is that it's so inconsistent with the kind of harm that happens in our society. The vast bulk of physical and sexual violence in our society is actually not perpetrated by strangers. It's perpetrated by people who know each other. And depending on how you count, and people are, have tried to figure this out, but like it appears that between a third and maybe a half of all stranger homicides in the US are actually committed by the police. So strangers, though, are really important for the sort of forces of repression to get us afraid of, because nobody thinks that the solution to harm between two people that are in relationship with each other is the state, right? Is punishment, is state violence, right? We think of other solutions when we think of interpersonal harm and how to resolve that kind of conflict. But it's really, really important for the state to create the impression that most of the violence we have to be worried about is from strangers. But what kinds of harm and things are we kind of not made to be afraid of when consuming the daily news? Well, things like wage theft. So wage theft costs about $50 billion a year. So that's when companies steal the wages of their workers, don't pay them what they're supposed to pay them, for example. That's about 5 times all of the other property crime that all the police officers in the United States count combined every year. Do you see nightly news stories in the Pittsburgh Nightly News about wage theft that's happening in this community, right? And most of the wage theft is happening from people who really, really, really need that money for the basic necessities of life. You don't see a lot about tax evasion on the nightly news. It's about $1 trillion a year. So it's like 60 times all of the other property crime combined in the United States. Why not? Well, the news tends to track and focus on the things that prosecutors and police focus on. And we know that prosecutors and police, even though they call themselves law enforcement, which is a really important term of propaganda that I talk about in the book, because they want you to think that it's all neutral, a law is broken, a law is enforced, when in fact, they only enforce some laws against some people some of the time in some places. And the decisions about which of those to enforce against whom are not made on some like beautiful, neutral analysis of what causes the most harm. They're made based on power. And the same dynamic is happening in the news. So that's why, for example, you're not made to feel afraid of air pollution in the news, even though there are millions of illegal acts of air pollution every single year in the United States, and air pollution kills 100,000 people in the United States every year. That's 5 times all of the homicide combined. But you don't walk around afraid about air pollution every single day. even though it's killing way more people that you love than any of the things that the news is focused on. And again, I'm not trying to minimize some of the things that the news focuses on. I'm just telling you that it's not a good approximation of overall threat and safety. It's narrowing our conception of safety. Water pollution is the same thing. There's hundreds of thousands of illegal criminal acts of water pollution. We don't see them on the nightly news, right? So Copaganda's first function is to narrow the things and people that we're afraid of. The second thing that it does is, having made us have a really narrow conception of safety and threat, it tells us at all times that we have to be more and more and more and more and more afraid of those things. Right? That's why over the last 25 years, every single year, people in the United States, when polled, say crime is up. Even though every single year for the last 25 years, except for 1 year, crime has been down. So how do we get to that point where so many people are so dramatically misled about something that they think is so important? It's interesting, if you look into that data a little bit, people are actually much more accurate when asked about their own neighborhood. So when asked about their own neighborhood, they're much more likely to say, well, my neighborhood is the same as last year, it's fine. It's everybody else, right? So actually, when your interpretation of the world is mediated through the mass media, you're more likely to be uninformed than when you're basing your perceptions on your own reality. Not that people's perceptions of their own neighborhood are that accurate either. There's really, really complicated forces at work there too, including things like next door, and we could get into that. But they're more accurate about their own neighborhood than they are about the rest of the society. And then the third and probably most important feature of Copaganda is, having narrowed our conception of threat, it made us really, 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 really afraid of that narrow range of things and people. The mainstream news is constantly telling us in a variety of ways that I get into in the book that the only solution to our fears is more and more and more and more investment in the punishment bureaucracy. More policing, more surveillance, more jails, more prisons, right? This is probably the most important point that I can make in the book, and that is that this thesis, which is really the core of most mainstream news coverage, is like climate science denial. It's like a modern kind of flat earther syndrome. It's completely and utterly inconsistent with all of the available scientific evidence. So what is the available scientific evidence? The available scientific evidence is that the levels at which people in a given society harm each other has much more to do with certain fundamental features of that society, like, for example, levels of inequality and poverty, levels of loneliness and isolation versus levels of human and community connection, toxic masculinity, poisoning like lead poisoning, various environmental factors, access to healthcare, access to housing. Early childhood education is a huge one, right? I could go on and on and on. I think you get the point. It has absolutely nothing to do with whether there are 13 cops on this beat or 9, or whether this prosecutor is too progressive because they only accepted 72% of the police charges last year, whereas the other prosecutor had accepted 76%. Or whether the punishment for this retail theft is like 14 months or 9 months, or 9 years versus 6 years. That stuff has absolutely nothing to do with how safe you are. And yet almost every single mainstream news article debates these little tweaks to the policies and the punishment bureaucracy as if they are the things that are determining how safe we are. Let me say 2 more little, I have to do something to get you guys to buy the rest of these books here. So I'll just give you a little bit more, so you'll feel like you can't get enough. But there's just 2 other concepts I want to highlight, so you have some sense of the kinds of things I get to in the book. And I try to be as funny as possible in the book, because this is like really serious, very upsetting stuff, and it's important that we try to laugh at some of the journalists that are doing it. But I think that there's just so much to understand at every level, from what stories are even thought of as newsworthy and which stories are not, to the volume of news, to within, which means how often are certain things being reported, and how often are they not being reported, to within the articles, who is a source and who's not a source, who is treated as an expert, whose opinion is not treated as an expert, what words and phrases are used, what are the framings that are being used, etc. What context is provided to you versus what context is omitted from you, right? So, but just for present purposes, I want to focus on this thing that I just mentioned called the volume of news. So the volume of news is connected to something that I talk about in the book called the selective curation of anecdote. So if you recall a few years ago, do you guys remember there was a freak out around the country about retail theft, shoplifting? Anyone? You guys remember that? Yeah, see some nods. So there was a video that many of you probably saw because you couldn't have consumed the news in the United States without seeing it, of a Walgreens theft, or someone was on a bicycle and they had it was actually it was very impressive. It should be like an Olympic sport or something. They had bags on each side of the bicycle and they were bicycling through the aisle and just throwing things in the bag and then zoomed out the front door, that one viral video, tens of millions of views. In the 4 weeks after that video was made, there were 309 news stories about that one shoplifting around the United States. In that same period, not a single news story about wage theft. So the volume of news matters. If you have, in a given year, maybe there are half as many murders in Pittsburgh as there were the year before, but if you have twice as many stories about murder, people are going to think there's more murder, okay? And this is really what I call the selective curation of anecdote, and one of the key themes that you have to understand about propaganda. The very best propaganda, particularly propaganda that is targeted at liberals and people who think of themselves as well-meaning. So I'm not talking about the fascists right now. There's very interesting things going on with fascist propaganda, very interesting and important things to be said about what the far right is doing. This book is actually about the New York Times and MSNBC and NPR and the Washington Post and the institutions that are thought of as kind of the non-fascist media, which the only times I talk about the fascists in the book are to show you that essentially the sort of mainstream news is doing exactly the same thing the fascists are doing, but they're doing it with words and language and framing that are designed for people like you, except unless there's some fascists here, in which case you probably came to the wrong event. But it's really, really, really important to understand that scholars of propaganda for at least a century have been thinking and talking about how the very best propaganda is propaganda that is based on true facts. Because if the propagandized audience is able to look at something and say that didn't happen, then they lose trust in you. The only exception to this really is when the level of control you have over the propagandized population is so extreme that it doesn't even matter. You're able to just completely obliterate the concept of truth, which actually we are seeing in some corners of our society. But traditionally, and particularly in the circles that think of themselves as more liberals, like people who are addicted to mainstream news consumption. My own parents who are here tonight, for example, suffered from, this is actually not funny, they suffered from a very serious case of MSNBC brainworms and had to be cured of that. But I still have people in my life that listen to Ezra Klein. It's baffling. We are talking about one of the most sophisticated and dangerous propagandists of the modern era. And I have a whole separate Ezra Klein thing I can do at some point, but very dangerous person. What makes him so dangerous is he is extremely effective at taking the sort of underlying neoliberal and far-right ideas and using kind of selective curation of true anecdote, omitting a lot of very important context, and getting people to oppose the kinds of more radical and structural changes that our society needs. He plays a very important role in what I talk about in the book as sort of the counterinsurgency ecosystem. His role is to stop people from going too far to the left, right? It's like some kind of like a honey trap for fruit flies or something, you know. But if you get too close to Ezra, then you drown like the fruit flies in those little like vinegar solutions. Okay, so the best propaganda is based on true facts. I promise this is the last thing I'm going to say, and then we'll get off out here. It's kind of like if I usually use Michael Jordan, but he plays sports balls that we don't have here in Pittsburgh. So I'll use my childhood hero Mario Lemieux maybe as an example. It's like if you ask me to explain to some young Pittsburgh child who Mario Lemieux was, who's never watched like the old NHL, I could make a montage of Lemieux's career. And I could make a video of every time Lemieux just like fell down, missed a shot, lost the puck, got frustrated, committed a penalty, right? Complained about being, a penalty and didn't get it, right? And I could make like a 9-hour video for this kid. And I show the kid the video and this kid's like, this is a terrible hockey player. How did this person even make it to the NHL? What I've done is I've used entirely true anecdotes, just like if I showed a video of 9 hours of Michael Jordan missing jump shots. What I've done is I've removed all of the great things that you did on the ice, right? And by selectively curating which anecdotes I show this child, I can create the impression that the greatest hockey player of all time should never have made it to the NHL. This is what the news media does with crime. Out of the millions of things that happened last night, somebody is deciding which 11 or 12 to tell you about and which ones not to tell you about. And that decision right there is the single most important decision that is made about how you see the world. It's not what they say in the articles. It's not who's quoted in them, right? It's the universe of information that you're even presented with that is doing so much of the work of shaping the kinds of things you even think about, the kinds of subjects you even conceive of as under debate in our society. So anyway, those are the kinds of things you can look forward to if you read the book. We can go more into that maybe in the Q&A session. So I've taken too long already, but Dr. Bangs, do you want to come out and maybe we can have a chat?
Okay, so we are extremely fortunate to have one of the nation's best legal system leaders here with us today. And I'm going to take a few minutes to ask 3 or 4 questions probably, and then I'll turn it over to you to ask questions of the topics most important to you. So let me start with this, Alec. One of your later points is a common point that's important, that the level of violence, lack of safety or safety in a community or area depends very much on social conditions, employment, poverty, preschool education, and so on. In your legal actions, in your efforts, to what extent are you able to get some of the cost savings, for example, from reducing money bail and jail populations to go towards these social support systems?
Almost zero, almost never. And I think it's a really, really important point. The court system is not designed as an engine of social change. One thing we can do in our cases is we can force the system to be a little bit less brutal, a little bit less violent. We just won a case in California a few weeks ago that is probably the most liberatory court decision in US history. It's going to release hundreds of thousands of people every single year in California. It basically said that people who are charged with misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies can't be detained at all pre-trial in California anymore. And but there is absolutely no mechanism in that case for the court to order the kinds of systemic and structural changes that our society needs to, for example, make sure people have safe places to live, to make sure people's children are playing in playgrounds that aren't polluted with lead, to have systems of care in place so that people get the treatment that they need, to do all of the things that like people need for a flourishing life for their families. That's just not something that happens in the court system. And so as lawyers, we're really limited in the kinds of remedies we can seek. And that's one of the reasons why it's absolutely vital for any lawyer working on these issues to try to think about a strategy for how their legal work is connected to and part of a broader social movement that is trying to build the kind of power that we need as a society for a multiracial working class coalition that can actually change the balance of power in our society.
Great. Okay. Your book, your many, many lectures in the US, around the world, focus on propaganda centrally to a large degree. When I used your book in my Pitt Osher class as the foundation book for my course, I had you as my first guest speaker. And 2 weeks ago, I was starting my course on extreme wealth, and my guest speaker said this, which was really critical. That is that she's a banking and financial industry expert, and she was so upset with the amount of propaganda that was used by that industry to get government bailouts after the great financial crisis, to not bail out the homeowners that lost their homes, to not change the rules to any way that would control them. So, to what extent, well, my point that I was going to make is that she decided to spend 5 years just fighting propaganda against by that industry. To what extent, what other strategies do you have besides the two I mentioned in the book and you having a lot of lectures to fight all this propaganda?
This is pretty much all I got. So we do a lot of we try a lot of things because it's, first of all, it's very, very difficult very few people are reading my book, relatively speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And very few people are reading any books, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
And also, there's basically been like a mainstream news boycott of this book.
Yeah.
And even outlets like NPR that would cover my last book are really reluctant to give this book a platform, precisely because I'm criticizing all these institutions in the book. And so we do a lot of really creative and cool things at Civil Rights Corps. So right now we're building a really amazing high school curriculum around the right to hug. And the goal there is to organize teachers all across the country to use this idea of a constitutional right to hug families to get students thinking really critically about the punishment bureaucracy, about family separation, about immigration, about profiteering and even private equity. And it turns out students are really into this. Students love the topic. And what we're hoping to build around the United States is students in classrooms all over the US are going to be investigating their own local jail and sheriffs and companies, and then doing papers in their school newspaper, and then we'll co-publish those with local outlets. And we're trying things like that. We have a few other projects I think are really exciting like that. We have an artist and poet in residence in our organization every year, and so we do a lot of things with the arts too, because we have to teach our lawyers not to think and talk like lawyers, and we have to be able to explain these concepts in other ways. But the curriculum project is a good example of an attempt to have these conversations in our society in other fora, and to organize people to have them in places where people are actually more open to thinking and learning and developing. Because I think first of all, we have no control over the mainstream news media, which is owned and controlled by some of the richest people in the world and who have no interest in having this conversation. So we have to find other places of having this conversation. And I think schools are a really great place to do that. But libraries are also a really amazing place for us to have these conversations. So we're trying to build this out with community groups, organizers, teachers, librarians, and others around the country to create spaces where we can start having some of these conversations, maybe not starting with something like Copaganda, but starting with something like, should people be able to hug each other? And why is it that we have reached a point in our society where people are legally barred from holding each other's hand or looking into each other's eyes, and someone is monetizing that? Like, let's just work back from there. And I think those are the kinds of strategies that we're thinking of that are an attempt to break the mold of how nonprofit organizations or lawyers typically think about like public relations, and have more to do with like actually connecting with people and making sure people understand what these systems are doing and why they're doing them, in places where their minds are more open to hearing that stuff.
Okay, sounds good. Let's talk about the county we live in, Allegheny County here. 2 days ago, the lead article in the Post-Gazette said that the Allegheny County budget was going to have a huge deficit after the end of this year. The pandemic stimulus funding will end at the end of this year. Jail costs have increased, including the overtime cost in jail. And of course, the county supports the district attorney's office, courts, and public defenders. 30% of their budget goes to criminal justice. If they had the money bail system, jail population would decrease, some of their costs would decrease. If they had a discovery law like New York State and New York City had, where district attorneys had to do more due process in terms of discovery and sharing that information on a timely basis with public defenders and lawyers for defendants, then a lot of the misdemeanor defendants were let go by the courts because there wasn't proper information. This is my question. To what extent are you able to use with state or local governments the cost savings, besides your legal action to like hit them and force them to change? To what extent is there traction in your discussions with state and local officials that, hey, you can save quite a bit of money here and maybe use it for some better purposes?
Hard question. The short and kind of crude answer is that the idea that these state and local officials are interested in saving money is just, I've never seen any evidence of that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something they say sometimes, but they're not interested in saving money when it comes to the jails and prisons and police and the military, right? It's a way of talking that promotes certain forms of austerity. And you have to understand also that there are the adversaries, the interests that profit from the punishment bureaucracy have been incredibly effective at baking in to the legal apparatus through things like police union contracts, for example, certain state laws. So we have a very undemocratic society in ways that most people don't even think about, which is, I'll just mention a couple of them that are kind of not in the public discourse. If local jurisdictions start to get too progressive anywhere in the United States, they can be overruled by state legislatures. And state legislatures are not democratic institutions. They're dominated by rural interests. That's just a fact all over the United States. It's very similar to how the United States Congress and Senate itself are dominated by non-urban areas, right? So a state like Idaho or Wyoming has the same number of senators as a state like New York or California. Those same anti-democratic structural principles are actually baked into Pennsylvania as well. So if Pittsburgh ever got a little bit too progressive with its local police or jail, I guarantee you the Pennsylvania state legislature, forget about the right-wing news media and the real estate developers and everybody else, the Pennsylvania state legislature, and so everybody who actually works in this system knows that, understands that fact very well, but the public doesn't really appreciate how undemocratic our constitutional structures actually are. So local governments are working with a really limited set of tools just in the first place, and they're not being honest with people about that. But then also for a variety of reasons, the unions and others have been extremely effective at locking even a potentially progressive local government administration into long-term contracts and make it very, very difficult to shift. So the short answer to your question is the cost savings from reducing the use of jails and prisons are actually very hard to realize in the short term. These are kind of long-term things that happen when you do a lot of amazing advocacy after Michael Brown's death went into this, but they actually shut down and closed and completely dismantled the workhouse, which is one of the two main jails in St. Louis. That's what you have to do. You have to literally shut things down if you want to stop it, because as James Earl Jones and Kevin Costner would say, if you build it, he will come. And if you build this infrastructure, it will be used. And so one of the things that we do a lot of is in our legal cases, we try to work with organizers and people who are thinking more strategically about long-term local fights to reduce the long-term investments in these bureaucracies. So another thing Allegheny County could do is just settle the big case we have against them right now about their probation practices, which would empty the jail. So if you know anyone in Allegheny County, we're happy to talk to them about reducing the jail population through that settlement.
Okay, this will be my last question. Then we'll turn to you for your questions. So please be ready. We'll get there very shortly. My last question is that I became familiar with your work maybe 5 years ago relating to one paragraph I used over and over again in my uh, policing studies is that you wrote about how almost all of the drug arrests and jail bookings and imprisonment relate to trivial amounts of illicit drugs, that it's really unbelievable how small the amounts are that are being used to prosecute and jail people. And so we know that there are 13 states in the country that have cannabis decriminalization, and that's led to some substantial reduction in jail and prison populations in those states and counties. Um, drug illicit drugs is one of the major reasons for the Black population being overrepresented in the criminal justice system, or the legal justice system, as you put it. What more should we be doing about this injustice relating to drugs?
Well, I never call it the justice system of any kind. Yeah. I usually say the punishment bureaucracy or the
Okay.
legal system. I don't want to give anyone the impression that either its purpose or its effect is to do justice. Not, it never has been. And anyone that tells you that it is, you should ask them, well, what year did that happen? Was it 1790? Was it 1840? Like, when did it become about justice? But I digress. So just so you have some conception of how profoundly, I don't even want to say broken because it's actually functioning quite well, but how profoundly different the system is from what it tells you. For most of the last several decades, there were more arrests in the United States for the possession of marijuana than for all violent crime combined. That's what law enforcement was choosing to make their priority. So there were hundreds of thousands of just completely untested rape kits. They saw these piles of rape kits in the police precinct, and they were like, you know what, we're not going to test those. We're not going to try to solve these rapes. Why? Well, because it's much more lucrative and much more consistent with the function of police in a very unequal society to target the poorest and most vulnerable people in our society, particularly immigrants and people of color, for low-level drug cases. So we're talking about, just so you understand, tens of millions of human beings had chains put on their bodies. They were taken away from their children. They were taken away from their jobs and their homes and their medical care. Their grandmothers were kicked out of public housing, right? They were brutalized in jail. Many of them, like Sandra Bland, died in jail, right? They were sexually assaulted by the millions over the last 40 years. We spent trillions of dollars in the war on drugs. We chemically polluted huge swaths of Latin America. We surveilled the communications of billions of people around the world. We searched and raided millions of people's homes in the United States. This is all for the war on drugs, okay? So-called war on drugs. And as I talk about in the book, the incredible fact that everybody who works in the system knows that they don't want people talking about is everybody in the system understands that the most dangerous drugs are much more available now than they ever were, and that overdose deaths are much higher in the last few years than they ever were 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. Okay? Nobody in the system who I've ever met thinks that the solution to someone using a substance that you don't want them to use, assuming that's even a concern of the government, nobody in the system that I've ever met thinks that the solution to that is putting someone in a cage. That's not an opinion you're going to find in the punishment bureaucracy among anyone who is even remotely capable of having a conversation. So, I mean, there are some people that think that who probably aren't capable of having a conversation about it, but haven't been talking to those people. So that's the war on drugs. That's what our society has been choosing to invest in, instead of policies that would actually make our communities safer. And I think, just to relate that to propaganda, and I have a little section on this in the book, it's still the case that if you read like the Associated Press or the New York Times, and they're talking about like Alabama's legislature passing a new harsh punishment bill for fentanyl, they treat it as if it's like a good faith attempt to reduce the use of fentanyl. Even though nobody who's ever studied that question thinks that the best way to reduce the use of fentanyl is increasing human caging. Nobody thinks that. So why are we acting as if the stated motivations of people in power are their actual motivations? The war on drugs has never been about reducing the use of illegal substances. And the war on drugs is actually a really good example because we have these like old Nixon records now. We actually have Nixon talking about what he believed to be the purposes of the war on drugs, attacking the New Left and black people. Literally, we know that. And so it's incredible to me that the mainstream news organizations are still taking these statements of intent about the war on drugs at face value. But I think the focus of the system on low-level, small amounts of substances that are on a list of substances that the government says you can't possess, as opposed to things that actually affect our health, well-being, and safety, is one of the great scandals of our time. And it's fascinating to me that the news media is still in that war on drug mode, to the point where now, like, there's been a bipartisan consensus about this for so many years that the U.S. military is now just assassinating people in boats in the Pacific Ocean that it claims are connected with drugs. As if even so, now it's like we've totally normalized the idea that not only should we criminalize possession of these materials, and that this is somehow. And I had some posts on Twitter where the New York Times and other news organizations were treating the Latin American boat assassinations as if they were a good faith drug interdiction operation, as if there weren't other reasons that was being done. It was mind boggling. Like, nobody thinks that blowing up these boats is actually going to reduce the flow of that drug, and as if the sort of extrajudicial death penalty were even a rational response to the possession of a substance the government doesn't want you to possess.
Okay, thank you for those answers. We have two people in the back with microphones. Please raise your hand if you have a question for Alec, and they will come to you. Go ahead, please, whoever you can get to first. Over here, and then we'll come over to this side.
Hello. I'm gonna try this out. Let's see. I really like getting names right. So is it Alec Karakatsanis? Is that how you pronounce your name?
Alec.
Oh, it's Alec? Okay. I tried to be fancy. Anyway, my name is Angelica. I actually go to doctoral school here in Pittsburgh. I'm writing my dissertation on institutional betrayal. So this was a very interesting topic for me to explore. I understand that your work is based on policing and the bureaucracy of punishment. And I see this same machinery work as a seasoned social worker of 10 years in everyday spaces: housing, job, substance use treatment, right? My question, so one of the aspects of this, when I started thinking about your work, was what happens when a person or people are deemed the opposite of safe and worthy? So I wanted to ask, in your experience in Alabama, in Michigan, what did you see happen, or what is your opinion about what happens to a person's sense of worth when the very mechanism that's supposed to protect them views them as a threat? And how does this feed the machinery that makes it so hard for social workers like myself to support these communities?
It's a great question, Angelica. Thank you. I probably can't do it justice, so I don't have an answer to it. I'll just react, say a couple of reactions inspired by it. So when I got to Washington, D.C. as a public defender, my first day in court, I went into the local juvenile court, which in many places around the country is just completely closed to the public. We actually have some new cases that are trying to require all the family and juvenile courts to be open to the public under the First Amendment, but this court is closed to the public. And when I got there, all of the children were fully restrained in metal chains in their hands to their waist to their legs, indiscriminately. I'm talking 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 11-year-olds with intellectual disabilities, kids who've been, suffered through tremendous trauma and abuse and neglect. And that's a whole other horrific story about, but the point I want to make here is two things. The experience was profoundly confusing for the children themselves. They started over the years, and I talked to so many of them, they started to believe that they themselves were dangerous because they were being told you can't even appear in public without every one of your limbs being chained to your body, right? That has a profound effect on a young child's sense of who they are. And then on the other side, I was fascinated in my time there by what are the ways in which the judges, prosecutors, we call them in DC, we call them the DYRS, but the youth services, social workers, and even the public defender says, by the time I got there, not even a public defender had objected to this practice in decades. No one could remember an objection to it. It's totally unconstitutional. We got it changed, right? But no one even objected to it. So what are the mechanisms through which when you tell everyone that somebody is so dangerous and someone is so not worthy of being treated like a human being, you enable the most brutal and horrific treatment of that person. And the point I want to make is that this is not limited to the Republicans. It's not limited to the current administration. That was happening in a courtroom where I bet you every single person in the courtroom would say they were a Democrat. In a city with every single elected member of the government was a Democrat. The mayor is a Democrat. The chief of police is a Democrat. The head of DYRS is a Democrat. The judges are all appointed by committees that are mostly full of Democrats, right? So how did, or you just go downtown in Pittsburgh, just like watch there's an amazing Pittsburgh Court Watch program that my mom started doing when she retired here. And I think the people that run Court Watch are here, maybe. But you could join the Court Watch, which is an amazing thing to do in your community. We need people court watching all over the United States. And you'll see this in Pittsburgh. You'll see that when you trigger that in people, and this is what the mainstream news is doing a lot of, it's changing our brain chemistry. It's changing how we think about other people. And when you do that enough, you enable us to treat human beings in a way that in any other context we would view as absolutely horrific. And so one of the reasons I wrote this book is to try to show people that even the people you think of as like nice liberal people are capable of monstrous like literally, like this was like a featured speaker of the Democratic National Convention who was looking at 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds and saying, I'm not gonna let you hug your mom. Like that's how far we've come as a society. And it's no wonder that we're in even greater danger right now because we've lost that connection to something really essential about human beings and human life. And so, yeah, that's what your question made me think of. I don't even know if I answered it, but anyway, that was my attempt.
Thank you. Can we get a question from this side? Where's our other person? Okay, go ahead, please.
Hi, my name is Ronnie Doss. My question was, so this year we're celebrating 250 years signing the Declaration of Independence.
We celebrating that?
My question for you was, like, what is the shelf life of democracy? And then what is, in other words, like, how much time do we invest in all of these radical shifts you're talking about versus to like shed inequitable baggage versus starting over?
Thank you for that. Again, these are tough ones. So I don't purport to be an expert in democracy or euphemistically starting over, which I guess is your word for some kind of revolution. But I want to just say a couple of just general observations. One is that I don't think you could ever meaningfully call this country a democracy. I don't think there's ever been a point in this country's history where it wasn't engaged in the most horrific and brutal anti-democratic forms of repression and violence all over the world. Now, at the same time, this country has always been a place where there have been incredible and inspiring pockets of beautiful resistance. And there have been people who have created little pockets of flourishing and beauty and equality. And so like, I don't think it's necessarily that helpful to think in at the level of like nation states. And I think it's much more helpful to think about even in a society as brutal and violent as ours, there are still every single day people doing amazing things for each other out of love, out of kindness, out of care. So there's a lot to build on. So like there's a lot to build on. We obviously have very, very difficult problems that we're facing, but also every single day people are proving to each other that when they come together and work on something together for their community, they can actually accomplish something really beautiful. So there's a lot to build on. So point one is that even if we have never been living in a democracy, we are also living in a place where really great things are happening. In terms of the shelf life, I mean, I guess I would just say I've spent my entire career working in the pockets of our society that have been completely and utterly fascist. The jails and I just described for you what a courtroom was like earlier tonight under the Obama administration, right? And so I think it's difficult to we are facing now an organized right-wing movement that is holding more and more levers of power. But I think if we have any hope of overcoming that movement, the anti-fascist coalition has to have a reckoning with the history and current practices of the corners of our society that people don't recognize as for what they are. That's why I'm so focused on Ezra Klein. That's why I'm so focused on the New York Times. That's why I'm so focused on NPR and MSNBC, because what's happening right now is those institutions are walking us off a cliff. So when the Democrats, like, I just did a blog post on this, but like when Democrats like, Angie Craig of Minnesota were boosting ICE and DHS, right before they came to Minnesota, or Chris Murphy was taunting the Trump administration because they weren't being violent enough with immigrants, right? These are the leading stars in the Democratic Party. When ICE did what it did in Minnesota, you had the leading figures in the Democratic Party who had just over the last few years supported record budgets for ICE every single year, coming out and saying not like not anything useful, but saying we need to give them more money for more surveillance technology and more training. When the person who shot Renee Good literally filmed himself executing her and was a trainer himself. So these like, if we have any hope, I wouldn't say a shelf life for democracy. I would just tweak it to like, if we have hope of moving toward a more democratic society, maybe for the first time, but moving closer on the spectrum to a society where human beings can all flourish equally, then we have to be honest within the anti-fascist coalition about like state repression and about its connection to capitalism and about its connection to the extraction of wealth from the most vulnerable people in our society. And until we do that in the anti-fascist coalition is gonna keep walking us off that cliff. It's gonna keep putting forward people who for whom there's such a contradiction between what they say and what they do that they actually further the fascist cause, because ordinary people look at them and they say, I don't trust what these people are saying. It's not consistent with my reality.
Okay. Can we get a question back here in the middle, please? Go ahead. Can we get mic to somebody back here in the middle?
Hi, I'm a researcher and I work with people that work with young people in the criminal justice and juvenile justice system, community-based violence prevention program. I find that we're at this point in society where access to media and access to news has sort of never been better, or more sort of media has never had this much reach, and everybody's addicted to consuming it. People do want to do better, but what do they do? What can we consume? How do we build? I also work with students. What critical thinking skill can we instill? Where people are thinking about things they're consuming, how do we separate things out? What do people do? How do we sort of ourselves into that?
Sounds like you're gonna love chapter 16. There's actually a criminal law in the United States that you can't write a nonfiction book and not have a chapter at the end that's like, what do we do about that? You talk about like like the worst problems in the world that seem to have no solution whatsoever. It's all depressing, and then you have like a last chapter that's like, well, but you can join a group in your community. But no, I have a lot of suggestions in chapter 16. Most of them involve being serious about educating yourself, changing the information that you consume, fortifying your mind as much as possible against the relentless propaganda, because it's so profoundly difficult to exist in our society without being bombarded with all of this. You have to be very vigilant about what information you let hit you. I mean, the most precious thing we all have is our own brain. And it's every single article that you read changes your brain chemistry in some way. Every video you watch changes your brain chemistry in some way. Take your life really seriously. Be really serious about what you let hit your brain. And then come together with other people. Because there's absolutely nothing that can be done of any use alone. It involves just getting together people, whether it's in your court watch program or participatory defense or jail support, mutual aid, or reading groups. They're doing stuff for your local library. I mean, there's so many things, and it almost doesn't matter. As you're doing stuff, you're finding other people that are working on the things you're passionate about. You bring your own unique skills to that, something good will start happening.
We're out of time, but let's take one more question. Who has the mic? Who has the mic? Quickly, please. A short question. Go ahead.
So, with a lot of money coming from these rich people to our politicians, how can we remove the lobbyists from our local politicians?
Well, I don't know. But I think what I try to offer in this book is a set of tools that you can use to help you figure out who is telling you something connected to something truthful and who is pulling the wool over your eyes. And the role of lobbyists and consultants and a lot of the pundits that you see, all the New York Times columnists, for example, their role is to mangle and distort reality for you. Their role is to interpret things for you. And they wouldn't be in their position if they were going to tell you things that were inconvenient for people with money and power. So the best antidote to the local lobbyist and consultant class is people developing the ability to think critically on their own and to differentiate between the lies that they're being told, or more importantly, the misinterpretations of the world that they're being told with true facts, because that is the hardest propaganda to get your head around and to confront. So I focus in the book on strategies for helping people develop that critical thinking skill. Like this book, and I'm not really an expert in, but this book is not really about sort of confronting money in politics or things like that. But like one step that we can all take, no matter what else we do, is building the capacity for critical thought. And building that capacity, not just alone in front of our own phone or computer, but building that capacity together in groups, because the knowledge that we're able to develop and the accountability that we have when we're in groups is so much more significant than it is if we're just like trying to do it all alone. It's very, very difficult to do alone.
Okay, please join me in thanking Mr. Karakatsanis.
going off so they can move the.
Well, no, he has to speak first.
Oh, speaking first.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for.
yeah.
Thank you for standing for me. Thank you so much. Okay, so Alec brought us this T-shirt, and I decided that we should give it to the youngest among us. So if you feel like you're the youngest person here, we have a T-shirt for you. We have more books. Go get your book. The line to get your book will be here. We'll start here and wind down here. And if you already have your book, we will start the sign-in line right here and wind down the hall. Thank you so much. Please help me thank Ralph and Alec again.
Can I say one more thing? I brought 6 extra copies of the book. So if you want a copy of the book but you can't afford to buy the book, or you don't want to buy the book but you want me to give you a free one, no questions asked. Just come up to me when I'm back here at the table and I'll give you a copy of the book.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great
Thank
job.
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go this way.
Okay.
I hope you thought all my questions